Hello, Troy Howarth. I've interviewed you before, but today is sort of a double bill, an extravaganza. We aren't talking about Italian horror, we're going into pure Americana. We're talking about your work on the Abbot Costello Universal Pictures box set, and also your upcoming book on John Carpenter. So, you did the audio commentary tracks for Abbot Costello Meet the Killer and Abbot Meet the Mummy. Abbot Costello Meet the Mummy. So, you said those were given to you, or you were saying that maybe there was another one they wanted you to do as well?
I received the offer from Shout Factory. It was over the summer, and it was one of those things where they wanted 3 tracks in a relatively brief period of time. And I do work quickly, but it was a little bit more than I was comfortable biting off at that time. So I picked the 2 of the 3 that I was offered that I was most interested in doing, which was Abbott Costello Meet the Killer and Abbott Costello Meet the Mummy.
And so they are horror films, and of course you love Italian horror, you love Fulci, Argento, all that. So it's a natural fit. So Abbott Costello Meet the Killer features Boris Karloff, who would not return to play Frankenstein for Abbott Costello Meet Frankenstein, leading one to think he might have had disdain for these movies. Regardless of that, what can you say about Karloff's appearances in the Abbott Costello films?
Well, I don't know that there was ever any attempt to get him for Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, because by that point he hadn't played the character of the Frankenstein Monster in a number of years. He'd only done the 3 films in the 30s, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and Son of Frankenstein. He always said they were in the proper order. The bride came first. And he was very protective of that character. He used to refer to it as the best friend he ever had, because he had been a struggling actor for many years and really had gone through some tough times. And then playing that role for James Whale in 1931, the Frankenstein Monster. Not Frankenstein. People make that mistake sometimes. They want to call him Frankenstein. Frankenstein's the scientist, of course. The monster is the monster. He saw the writing on the wall in the sense that the character was being reduced to more of a prop, more of a kind of a killing machine. But I think he was also aware of the fact that he was into his 50s by then, and it was time to sort of hang it up, because it was a very physically demanding role. So I don't think he was actually offered Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, but when the film was coming out and being promoted, Universal asked him if he would do some PR for the film by sort of posing in front of the marquee and pointing at it and so forth. And Karloff said, well, okay, I'll do it, but as long as I don't have to watch the movie. And I think the only reason he said that was because, again, he was very protective of the character. I don't think he was trying to be snooty or anything like that. Abbott and Costello Meet the Killer was kind of reconfigured into something slightly more macabre. It's not really a horror film in the same way that the other ones are, the Meet the Monster movies are, because there's no monster in it. It's ultimately kind of more of an old dark house type of a scenario, but the character that he plays in the film was originally written to be played by a woman. So obviously it wasn't written with him in mind. They just decided, since Abbott Costello Meet Frankenstein was so successful, we need to do something to capitalize on that. So in a way, it's kind of surprising in hindsight they didn't get Lugosi to play that character of the Swami, because that would have been more in line with some roles he had played in the past. But Universal was kind of a little bit unfair towards Lugosi, and obviously Karloff was a bigger name at the time anyway, so they were eager to get him involved. Then he wasn't even intended to be in Abbott and Costello Meet Jekyll and Hyde either. That was originally supposed to be Basil Rathbone, but Rathbone wasn't able to do it, so Karloff agreed, and he always said he had a good time working with Bud and Lou.
Yeah, it's great. In your tracks, you really go in depth about Karloff and Lugosi in Universal and the history of the Mummy movies at Universal. So it's great to get that background. And you said earlier that some people confuse the monster Frankenstein as Dr. Frankenstein, and some people insist it's Frankenstein.
Frankenstein is Frederick. Should it be Frederick Frankenstein? Yes, that was a mistake that Universal was actually very much directly responsible for. I mean, if you look at the films, the titles were correct, so to speak. Really until they got to Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, because Frankenstein isn't in the film. It's the monster, although there is a disciple of Frankenstein that's in the film, but, kind of splitting hairs there, I guess.
Yes. And it's fun that they did those crossover movies. You know, some people think that Marvel started it. No, Universal did it years ago. So, yeah.
Oh, that's very true, and it obviously did tremendous box office for them. And when they did Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and the business was good, they figured, well, if two can bring them in, then we need to pack it with as many as they could. And surprisingly, although they thought about it, they never did find a way to work the Mummy into one of their Monster Bash films. Although Paul Naschy did that later on with the Silent Terror, he was able to work the Mummy in. So eventually, somebody was able to do it.
That's good stuff. So, please tell me why you prefer Bud Abbott over Lou Costello.
Well, you can't be a fan of Abbott and Costello and not like them both.
Right.
And they were both brilliant at what they did. Costello, to me, sometimes can be a little bit draining and a little bit tiring because, he does a lot of the sort of whining and so forth. I love Abbott because he's just such a wonderfully slick sociopath. It probably says a lot about me. He's just always on the make, and he's always got a scheme. And he's just so pointlessly mean-spirited, towards his best friend. He's constantly setting him up to fail. And I always remember there was a bit on the Abbott and Costello show they did in the 1950s where they have a radio playing. They're having some friends over, and they have a radio playing, and the landlord's getting bent out of shape, telling them to turn the radio off. And Abbott keeps constantly turning it back on and allowing Costello to take the blame for it and get beat up while he just sits in a chair and acts like he's doing nothing wrong. And there's also, I think it's Pardon My Sarong, where they're stranded at sea at one point on this sort of lifeboat. And Bud is trying to get Lou to kill himself. I can't stand to see you suffering like this. You need to kill yourself. It's horrible, and I don't know how they got away with that with the censorship at the time. But I can't stand to see you suffering like this. Please kill yourself. I love it. I just think that just sums him up. He's just a wonderfully nasty character, and I probably just gravitate to nasty characters.
Got it. Yeah, I can see how Lou Costello would be taxing maybe to your temperament.
A little bit sometimes. I mean, he's funny. Don't get me wrong. He had some very, very funny bits. But when you have to choose between the two, for me the choice is obvious. I'm a Bud Abbott fan through and through.
Got it. All right. So I'm assuming the Universal Classic Monsters mashup with the Abbott and Costello world was essentially someone's calculating from a business point of view. Like, they're both popular. Let's cross them together and make some money off this. But I think it kind of works in an interesting way where it kind of bends what's funny and what's scary for that audience. And I was wondering, do you agree with me? Do you think it is an interesting accident?
Well, I mean, from a practical level, you have to understand that in the 40s, Universal was not one of the major studios. They weren't Fox. They weren't MGM. And the things that kept them afloat in the 40s were Abbott and Costello movies, Deanna Durbin musicals, and their horror films. It's probably just as well they didn't find a way to combine Deanna Durbin and the Monsters, so they went with Abbott and Costello instead. It's just traditional with cycles, and not just with horror films. It's with just virtually any genre. The spaghetti western comes to mind, for example, with the Bud Spencer, Terrence Hill Trinity movies. When you get into parody, the genre kind of collapses onto itself. It's hard to take it seriously. But the reason that Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein works so well, and bear in mind this is a movie that Abbott and Costello didn't want to do the film. Lou was particularly vocal in his criticism. He thought the script was moronic. He said my little kid could write a better script than this. And he was very, very he did not want to do the film at all, which was originally called The Brain of Frankenstein until they changed the title to Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. And they just thought it was a ridiculous idea and it wasn't going to work. But it does work, and the reason it works so well is that the monsters are treated with tremendous dignity. Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney Jr. in particular, playing Dracula and the Wolfman, Larry Talbot, they're not made into the butt of the joke. They're treated with great respect. So, like all the best combinations of horror and comedy, and I would think of movies like Polanski's The Fearless Vampire Killers, John Landis's An American Werewolf in London, Joe Dante's Gremlins and The Howling, Tom Holland's Fright Night. Even going back to James Whale, with The Old Dark House and Bride of Frankenstein, You know, the humor arises out of the creepiness and vice versa sometimes, and that's why it works as well as it does. It's legitimately effective on both levels.
So the commentary tracks are, I think, the real selling point for my audience to pick up the Abbott Costello Universal Pictures box set, because you get such a, you learn so much about them and how the love and hate relationship they had, and also you see how they fit into Hollywood in that time. And of course, who doesn't love the golden era of Hollywood? So I think it's that more studious lens into very silly movies that makes it kind of worthwhile. So if people hear that and that sounds interesting to them, what would you suggest for further reading?
The best book on Abbott and Costello undoubtedly is Abbott and Costello in Hollywood, written by Ron Palumbo, and I cannot remember the other guy's name, but they both did commentary tracks for the set as well. And that book was my major go-to resource as far as finding information about the films to sort of help fill out the track with, the practical behind-the-scenes aspects of the shooting schedules and so forth, and cut scenes and all that sort of material. It provides a really comprehensive overview of not just their movies, but also their work in vaudeville and on television as well. They were a tremendously popular team for a long, long time, and again, really helped to keep Universal afloat during the 1940s.
All right. So, and if you could do another commentary track or multiple commentary tracks for another Screwball era duo or team, who would it be?
I would have to say the Marx Brothers. I love their films. Groucho is obviously my favorite, but I love Chico and Harpo as well. Don't have a lot of love for Zeppo. Sorry, Zeppo, but I do. I love Duck Soup and Day at the Races and A Night at the Opera in particular. And there are bits in those films that just constantly crack me up. The bit with the intercom in A Day at the Races, Hackenbush. And it's just hysterical. I could watch that again and again and again and laugh every single time. So if I were given an opportunity to do one of those films, I would be obviously thrilled. But I love Laurel and Hardy as well. They were wonderful, and various others. But I was never really so much into the Stooges, for example. That always kind of eluded me. Although I did like them when I was a little kid, but not so much now. But the Marx Brothers definitely would be high on my list of something I would love to do sometime.
And of course, who can forget the great Howard Hawks and his contribution to the screwball genre?
Oh, yes, absolutely. His Girl Friday and Bringing Up Baby, just, hysterical, brilliant films in their own right. And Howard Hawks is one of the great kind of chameleon filmmakers of his period. He worked in just about every genre imaginable, and pretty much did at least one great film in just about every genre he worked in.
All right, which is the perfect segue to our next conversation piece, shifting gears a bit to John Carpenter. So please give us a tease about your upcoming book, Assault on the System, the Nonconformist Cinema of John Carpenter.
Well, it's a book I've wanted to do for a number of years. When I originally had my first book, The Haunted World of Mario Bava, published in 2002 by FAB Press in England, I wanted to do a book on Carpenter at that time, but it wasn't really met with a great deal of enthusiasm at the time, and that kind of took the wind out of my sails a little bit, and I really basically spent the next more than a decade not doing any books. I was doing a lot of reviews and things for various online outlets, but I didn't attempt another book until over a decade later. And it's a topic I kept coming back to. I knew I was going to do it someday because he's just one of my favorites. He's one of my heroes. I love his films. I love his music, and I wanted to do a book that would pay tribute. Like all of the books that I've done about specific directors or actors, I've wanted to really pay tribute to the full scope of their work, not just the popular titles, but all of them. And, with a clear eye, not just praising everything. A John Carpenter movie isn't great just because John Carpenter directed it. He's made some duds, but he made a lot of great films, and I wanted to pay tribute to those, and also analyze the ones that maybe don't work as well, and talk about it in a way that is maybe a little bit more even-handed than what you see online, where very often you get these fans who are kind of suffering from entitlement mentality, where how dare he make a bad movie? He owes us another good movie. Well, he doesn't owe you anything really. If he's given you one movie that you really love, he's gone above and beyond. So I got to interview John for the book, and he was lovely to deal with, very, very kind and very supportive. I also interviewed his wife, Sandy King Carpenter, who's produced a number of his films and been involved behind the scenes on a number of others as a script supervisor. And also the actor Keith Gordon, who played the lead in Christine. And they all had wonderful stories to tell and anecdotes to share. Tried to get a bunch of other people too, but a variety of interviews didn't pan out for a variety of different reasons. But I'm very happy with the end result, and I'm hoping people will enjoy it.
All right, definitely. So the music John creates for his movies is simply incredible. And do you believe that this, him being like a triple threat, a writer, director, composer, gives him even more of a sense of authorship than even a writer, director?
Well, I mean, it probably helps that his name is always above the title, which started with Halloween and carried through all of his films except for Memoirs of an Invisible Man, which is that way for a reason, as he explained to me. I mean, it definitely, there's an attitude and there's a sensibility and there's a style that's very clear in his films. Of all those guys that came out in the American sort of genre cinema of the 70s, he's the classical craftsman. He's the guy who wanted to make films that were slick and stylish. He loves widescreen. He's always insisted in working in Panavision, and he's always insisted on the films looking and sounding as good as possible. It was a bone of contention with him and his collaborators on Assault on Precinct 13 because he had a very low budget. He insisted on shooting in Panavision, and he insisted on having the best lab to develop the film and the best sound facility to do the sound work. And a lot of people thought that was a big waste of money, but he realized that if I make something that looks and sounds good, people are going to take me more seriously. So it's very different from like Wes Craven and George Romero and Tobe Hooper and so forth. He made these kind of raw and very visceral films. Carpenter's movies don't tend to be quite as visceral on a certain level. They have a heavy sense of irony, and they have a heavy sense of, very, well, again, as the title of the book kind of suggests, very critiquing figures of authority and all the sort of things that are in place in control in society and so forth, but not movies that were really designed to be as confrontational with something like Last House on the Left or Night of the Living Dead, for example, but always with a great eye towards classic craftsmanship, which is something that he pulled from directors that he loved, especially Howard Hawks, as we mentioned before.
Yeah, so that's really a great segue to my next question. Howard Hawks, okay. He's like a god to John Carpenter. I saw John Carpenter's top 100 favorite films, and Howard Hawks has got like a dozen of them. It's incredible. So, and like Hawks, he is very professional in that kind of icy cool way. Like you said, less raw, more like cool, like detached, I guess. So besides The Thing from Another World, what are some of the films by Howard Hawks that people can look to that had a great influence on John Carpenter?
Well, Rio Bravo is the big one. John pretty much remade it as Assault on Precinct 13. I mean, that's the story. Rio Bravo, which Hawks himself even remade as Rio Lobo around 1970.
Right. So
it's a good story setup that's worth repeating, and Carpenter put it into an urban landscape as opposed to the sort of classical Western scenario. That's one of the big movies that influenced him. I know he also adores Only Angels Have Wings. You mentioned A Thing from Another World, which is kind of a contentious title in the sense that he's not the credited director, and some people who worked on the film insisted that Christian Nyby, who's credited as director, directed it, and other people said no. And Nyby had been an editor before that and had worked on Hawks's films and studied his technique and his style. So, the jury's out on that to a certain extent. Some people swear that it was Hawks who directed the whole film, ghost directed the whole film. Other people deny that. But definitely, if you really want to get a sense of the impact that Hawks had on Carpenter, I think Rio Bravo is the big one that you need to check out.
Yeah, definitely. It's that sort of chill vibe. Not always highly plotted or action packed, but it's a hell of a picture. So I'd love to hear a bit about your phone conversation with John Carpenter for this book, without giving it away too much, obviously.
I mean, I was scared to death, obviously, because he's been one of my heroes for as long as I can remember. I mean, again, it helped that his name was above the title. So he was one of the, along with Hitchcock, he was probably the first director that I was aware of. Like I was watching a John Carpenter film, I was watching an Alfred Hitchcock film. I knew who those guys were from an early age. And, Carpenter's films, they have a similar look. Again, the widescreen, the use of light and shadow and so forth, but also the use of the synth soundtracks. And just this kind of cool, ironic sensibility. Not ironic in the sense that he's poking fun at the genre, because he doesn't do that. He doesn't like that. But, ironic in the sense that, kind of poking fun at life in general and the kind of absurdities of life. So there's a lot of things that even as a very young kid I picked up on and was aware that made his movies special to me. So I knew that when I did the book, I wanted to interview him if at all possible. And you're aware of the fact that you're dealing with a man who is, he's in his 70s now. He's been interviewed 1,000 times. He's getting the same questions over and over again.
Right.
And he does have a reputation in some circles for being a little bit waspish and a little bit cynical and not. I've talked to some people who didn't like him. I had already met him briefly in 2016 at during one of his concerts. He came to Pittsburgh and put on a show in Homestead, which was absolutely brilliant. Him and his son and his godson, doing the music from his films while scenes play on the screen behind them. And I thought he was very nice. And when I talked to him on the phone, having listened to his commentaries and listened to his interviews and read about him down through the years, I'd always just sort of formed this impression that he's probably just a little bit shy. He's not a terribly talkative guy. He doesn't go on and on and on. And he just has this kind of, cool sensibility and kind of, no straight down the line, unpretentious, very down to earth. In fact, just, not to digress too much, but if you ever see the interview with him, the roundtable interview with him, John Landis and David Cronenberg, included on the Videodrome disc and also I think on one of the discs of the thing. It sums them up perfectly. You got John Landis, who's just cracking jokes and he's laughing and everything, and that's John Landis. You got David Cronenberg, who's very studious and very serious and very intellectual. And you got John Carpenter, who's just a classical, old-school craftsman who's just, just laying it on the line in very unpretentious kind of terms, and that's who he is. So I knew that going in, and so I found him to be funny. I think that his humor sometimes doesn't always translate in print, funnily enough. It's one of those things, you're talking to somebody, you can tell they're kind of kidding you a little bit. If you read it in print, he might seem a little bit, again, sort of waspish. But I thought he was very nice. He patiently answered all my questions. I had quite a few questions, and I was worried that I would go on for too long. But he was fine. And again, just I thought very supportive and very kind. And sometimes you meet your heroes and it's a disappointment, but I had no such reservations about talking with him.
That's good to know. And you also talked to his wife, Sandy. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, she's a talker between the two. She talks more.
Okay.
But she's not in a bad way. She just, you can tell that, the dynamic there, he's probably the one who kind of nods a lot. She does the talking. But that makes sense, of course. She's a producer, and she's kind of a mover and a shaker, whereas he's more wants to deal with Struck. He's going to go make the movie, and he's very focused and very, again, very professional. I thought, again, she's very nice. I had nothing negative to say about either of them. I mean, I thought they were both very good-natured. Again, I had a lot of questions for her, and she's had a very interesting career that I don't think a lot of people quite know. She had worked as a script supervisor for a number of years, had worked with John Cassavetes, had worked with Michael Mann, had worked with Francis Ford Coppola, and done a lot of interesting films, big films and little films, before she started working with John on Starman. And, obviously, at that time he was married to Adrienne Barbeau, but their marriage fell apart, and he and Sandy became an item afterwards. And they've been together ever since, which in Hollywood terms is a very long relationship indeed, especially for two people who work in the film industry.
Yeah, God, it's true. It's definitely true. So, and Keith Gordon, so you got to talk to him as well. And, of course, he's the star of Christine. Does he still have fond memories of working on that project?
Oh, he loved it. He loved John. Keith is a director himself these days. He's made some very critically acclaimed films. He's also worked on a lot of really top-notch TV shows like Better Call Saul, for example, and a variety of other programs. And he's directed some really, really good films like A Midnight Clear and so forth. And he learned a lot from John. And he'd also worked with Brian De Palma before that on Home Movies and Dressed to Kill. So we talked a lot about them in particular and the impact that they had on his career. And he has nothing but fond things to say about that film. As he said, it was unusual for a young actor like him to get to play essentially Jekyll and Hyde, a character that is as well delineated as that, and it gave him an opportunity to really play those extreme emotions. And he said that it was a wonderful experience. Carpenter was very supportive and very practical. And, he brought humor to the set. He would joke around. He said more so than De Palma would. He would joke around and all that, but very focused where the work needed to be done. And allowed a little bit of ad-libbing here and there. He was open to good ideas. Sometimes would tell him, yeah, that's not going to work, and kind of move on from there. But he just it's clear he has all the affection and all the respect in the world for John Carpenter, and he had a lot to say. He definitely was a talker. Transcribing that interview versus transcribing John's interview was a very different experience.
Yeah, Christine is an excellent adaptation, I would say, because that book is so long and the movie's pretty lean.
Well, the book isn't all that good from my point of view, and it was written during Stephen King's snowy period. He was ingesting a lot of nose candy, and he said he doesn't even remember writing that book, which is kind of sad. So the book posed a lot of different problems that John was aware of, and one of them was the fact that the car in the book is sort of controlled by this previous owner, and the corpse is in the back seat and kind of manifests every now and again. And John was concerned that if he did that, people would say he was sort of ripping off the appearances of Griffin Dunne in American Werewolf, where he keeps showing up, gradually more and more rotting away. So they decided to drop that and really did streamline it with Bill Phillips, the screenwriter, and made a film that has a lot of great characterization and a lot of great character parts too. I mean, Keith Gordon's wonderful, of course, but also the sort of smaller supporting characters played by really great character actors like Robert Blossom and Robert Prosky and even Harry Dean Stanton, adding a lot of weight to what could have been a really boring part as a policeman. So it's a good film. I think it's a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for. It came at a bad time in his career because The Thing had come out and was savaged, and it had bombed badly, and then he produced Halloween 3, which was also a big disaster. So he got fired from Universal, where he was mounting a version of Firestarter that he was really excited about doing. He had a cast lined up that included Richard Dreyfuss and Burt Lancaster, and Darwin Jostin from Assault on Precinct 13 was going to play the part that George C. Scott ended up playing in the film that they made without Carpenter. So he was really sad about that. And he was also concerned that, here he was in his mid-30s and he was washed up, and he has been because nobody wanted to hire him. So the only reason he did the film was out of sheer desperation. And that caused him for a long time to kind of downplay it as a movie he wasn't all that fond of. But he speaks of it fondly these days. And I think it is a very, very good film.
Yeah, I think it's strong. I don't like it as much as Escape from New York, but I think it's not an embarrassment to the filmography whatsoever. No. And a great soundtrack as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely, it's a spare and somewhat atonal score. It's not quite as elaborate as some of the other ones. It's a lot more sort of moody, droning on the synth than some of the other. But it works for that film very, very well, and I think it's not that there's such a thing as a bad John Carpenter soundtrack. There may be a couple of bad John Carpenter films, but I don't think there are any bad John Carpenter soundtracks.
So, yes, he's made many wonderful films, but as both you and I will admit, not all of them are classics. And I believe his last film was in 2010. So, has he given up on making another one?
He's cagey. I mean, I asked him that, and he said, "Oh, you never know." I think he would leave the door open to the possibility. If he were desperate to make a movie, there's no doubt that he would be making a movie. Even if he ended up going the sort of Argento route and doing not a GoFundMe, but one of those crowdfunding things, which didn't work out in Argento's case at all, unfortunately. But if he was desperate enough, he would do it, and he would find the backing, I'm sure. It's got to be the right set of circumstances. He told me that after Ghosts of Mars, when he reached the ending of the filming of the Ghosts of Mars, it was a very physically difficult film to do. It was a lot of night shooting out in the desert, and a very unpleasant movie to make in many respects. And then doing the score on top of that, he said, I realized if I kept doing what I was doing, it would kill me, you know. And you can see it if you look at him, how he aged after a certain point. He really worked himself hard. That's one of the points I make in the book, is I don't think people realize just how hard he worked and for how long. That there were, you know, he didn't stop. And even if it looked like he wasn't active during certain years, he was developing projects and working on things that fell apart. Various different movies that he was planning on doing. He even had a movie going as part of his deal with Universal in the late 80s that was all ready to go and was like 2 weeks away from shooting until it got canceled. So, you know, he was constantly working. And I think I mean, the man smoked like a chimney for many years too. That didn't help, but you can see after a certain point he looked a lot older than his years. So I think he was probably right. If he would have carried on like that much longer, it probably would have been the death of him.
I heard they were going to do a third Escape movie called Escape from Earth.
I talked to him about that, and it had been rumored that Ghosts of Mars was kind of a repurposed version of that, and he said that wasn't true, that Ghosts of Mars was its own thing. There was talk about doing Escape from Earth. Unfortunately, Escape from LA did not do well. I happen to like Escape from LA, unlike a lot of people. I think it's actually a very satirical movie. It's very funny, darkly funny, and it needs to be appreciated for what it is instead of what people would like it to be. I think it's much better than a lot of people give it credit for. And John actually has indicated before that in some respects he likes it even more than Escape from New York. I wouldn't go that far myself, but I do like it. And if the film had done better, there would have been a third one. It's too late now, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, Kurt Russell is in good shape for his age, but I don't think that he'd be able to play Snake Plissken at this point.
Yeah. Did you guys talk about the Escape from New York remake at all?
Not specifically, although, you know, his attitude about the remakes is very practical, and a lot of people give him grief for this, but you know, again, a lot of the fans are really weird. They love you when you deliver, but then they can turn on you in the worst possible way, and I think he's seen a lot of that, and it's unfortunate. A lot of people have said some really nasty things about him and his films, and his attitude is just basically, as long as they pay me, I don't care what they do. And I don't blame him. I mean, he's in his 70s. He's reached the point where he's just relaxing a little bit. He's doing music with his son and his godson. He's not interested in putting up with all the headaches and all the stress of making films in Hollywood anymore. So if they want to take his old films and redo them, hey, look, they're going to do it anyway, so he might as well get a payday out of it. So I don't blame him.
I hear he plays a lot of Sonic the Hedgehog and watches the NBA a lot.
He loves video games, and it's absolutely true. He lives from March Madness, and that was part of the thing when he did Masters of Horror. He did 2 episodes of Masters of Horror, one of which, Cigarette Burns, I think is one of the best things he's ever done. Really brilliant little piece for Masters of Horror from 2005. His concern was, well, it depends on what it is. If you're filming in March, I can't do it. He's very serious about it. He loves it. He's very much into that, but he loves video games. He's loved video games for a long time. He got into them because of his son. He used to play them with his son, and then I think he took more of an interest in them than his son did. So he's big. And he was talking at various different points. There were various different video games that he was interested in making films of. I'm not really a video game fan myself, so I don't really know much about these games. But I know, like Dark Child, for example, and Psychopath. There was some sort of a game that he was looking to do a film of that, and a couple of others as well that he was interested in doing. He takes that medium very seriously, so he really enjoys it immensely.
Oh, good for him. You know, we all have to have things we enjoy. So having a great lead actor, sometimes as an on-screen manifestation of the director, can be a very powerful thing. So what character traits of John Carpenter does Kurt Russell represent in your mind?
Well, again, just the no-nonsense guy who gets the job done. The sort of cynical, jaded perspective. Not heartless, not without compassion, not without empathy, but somebody who just kind of calls it for what it is, and is just kind of, again, unpretentious, and has a task at hand and is going to accomplish that task as best as possible. That's how I'd see it.
Interesting. And also, he's very handsome too, Kurt Russell.
Yes, well, yeah, he's the leading man that John isn't quite,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, he definitely. But they, when they were younger, there were certain similarities there in terms of their presence. But Kurt was always definitely the handsome leading man of the two, no doubt about it.
And certainly their commentary tracks together are some of the best in the business, I'd say.
Well, I love pretty much all of John's tracks in general. He was one of the ones when I first started listening to commentaries back in the 90s when I had a Laserdisc player, if you remember those. Hearing him on Escape from New York and Halloween and Assault on Precinct 13 and so forth was just, that was like going to film school. And he's just great to listen to because he's very, he's not ethereal and artsy about it. He's very nuts and bolts and practical and down to earth about it. And he doesn't take himself too seriously, although he takes his work seriously. He's not going to sit there and sort of wax on about what a genius he is. He's not that way. So his tracks in general are really good, but when you put those two together, you can just tell they're great friends. They love each other's company, and they crack each other up. They talk very little about Big Trouble in Little China on the track, but they're just having a blast, and it's great to listen to. So sometimes that's enough. If you get two people together who really have that kind of chemistry, you can see why they work together as often as they did. And I kind of wish they would go back and do a track for Escape from L.A., and even go back and do Elvis, although John told me that he would never do a track for that film because it was too long. So, but I think two of them could fill that track, I'm sure.
So The Thing is a great movie, of course, from the effects point of view, and also the sort of puzzle box storyline that it has, and, the Ennio Morricone music, everything about it. It's really stood the test of time, even though it did not do good box office theatrically, unfortunately. And it's also got nothing to do with communism like the Hawks version. So what do you think this film is about? Sort of, if there is a subtextual thing going on beyond just it being a cool movie.
I mean, it's about what is it to be human? What makes a human being into a human being? Loss of identity, and it really deals with sort of existential concepts in a way that, again, he's not going to unpack that in really serious terms because he'd be worried about sounding pretentious about it. But it's true. It deals very much with that concept of what makes somebody into a human being, and what makes somebody worth trusting. If you're with a group of people and all of a sudden something is going wrong, who do you trust, and can you trust anybody? Can you even trust yourself? So it's dealing with all of these kinds of things about identity and that kind of crisis of trust. And it's a really, really superbly told story in every respect, and yet very, very few critics at the time got it. Gene Siskel was one of the few critics who actually stood up for The Thing at the time. Roger Ebert tore it apart. Most of the critics tore it apart. They just and the thing that amazes me about it is how many of them said that the special effects overwhelmed the story and the characters were unsympathetic. I find those characters tremendously sympathetic myself. And to me, the idea, maybe the first time it's a little overwhelming, but if you go back and actually pay attention to it, the story is absolutely front and center. It's not just a special effects showcase at all.
Troy Howarth, thanks so much for chatting with me today. It was a great conversation. Before I let you go, may you please tell me what else you've got coming out in 2020?
There will be numerous commentaries that will be coming out. Some of them I can't really mention because they haven't been officially announced yet, but Kino is putting out a Jack Arnold Western called The Man in the Shadow with Jeff Chandler and Orson Welles. That's coming out here in March, I think, with my commentary. A trio of Dario Argento's later films, Phantom of the Opera, The Card Player, and Sleepless, are all coming out with my commentary with Nathaniel Thompson. Two of them, as a matter of fact, are available now, the Phantom of the Opera and The Card Player. I'm hoping that people listening who listen to those tracks might kind of reevaluate those movies because they tend to get picked on a lot. And a bunch of others that I can't really talk about yet, but also in terms of books, not only the Carpenter book, Assault on the System, but also a book on Dario Argento called Murder by Design, The Unsane Cinema of Dario Argento. And since these two books are coming out from different publishers, I'm very much hopeful that they will come out around the same time in June. So you'll have plenty to read at that time if you're interested.
And that is just an amazing title for a Dario Argento book.
Well, thank you. And I have to give Vincent Pereira, a Facebook friend of mine, credit for the unsane bit. Of course, that was the American title of Tenebrae. I don't know what unsane means, but it looks cool and it seems to fit. So, I'm very proud of both books. Actually, I'm very pleased, and I hope people will enjoy them. And hopefully learn something from them.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time, Troy.
Thank you.